welcome to the Clean Water series with Proline Fittings. I'm your host, Justin Giroux. This week's episode is very special. We'll be honoring the deadly tragedy that occurred in Walkerton, Ontario, some 20 years ago, highlighting the need to protect our water resources. This week's guest has experience as an executive director with a number of Canadian institutions, helping Canadians in various ways. He holds a master's degree in international business, graduating magna cum laude, and is currently the executive director and president of the Walkerton Clean Water Center. Welcome, Carl Kunhke, to the show. So, Carl, thank you so much for being on the show. I wanted to ask you, for those folks out there who maybe don't remember Walkerton or who weren't around, what happened 20 years ago?
It was if we can use the term perfect storm, it was a perfect storm, a combination of, at the time, what were lax regulations in drinking water in the province, and not just in this province, but all across Canada, and human error and, frankly, human deception. And the problem, in a technical sense, was that E. coli from locals' farmers' fields had found its way into the wells in Walkerton here, and it was not discovered for a number of days by the public. It was discovered very quickly by the two brothers who were running the drinking water system, both of whom were very untrained, had been grandfathered into their positions, and with a lack of inspection and a lack of regulations, didn't tell anybody for a number of days. And as we all know, 7 died, thousands were sickened, and some still suffer today and are in either long-term care or hospitals today with permanent kidney problems. And that resulted in what we now know today as the Walkerton crisis, just exactly 10 years and 20 years, sorry, and about 2 months ago in May of 2000.
Yeah, I recall, I was a student then, and I recall when the tragedy happening thinking, wow, this is amazing that this is happening in Canada, in Ontario, that something like this could happen.
And it could have happened anywhere. It
Yeah.
happened to have happened in Ontario, but one of the good things that came out of it, not only for Ontario, were drinking water regulations that made sense, but a number of jurisdictions around the world, not just North America, ended up looking at the Walkerton crisis and cleaning up their act very quickly.
Oh, no kidding. So this is something that encouraged folks from other parts of the world to look at their practices.
It did. There were, in many jurisdictions, including the United States back then, 20 years ago, not a lot of broad testing and training for drinking water operators. Every jurisdiction had its own way of doing things. Many people, as in Ontario, were grandfathered into the regulations, or grandmothered, as the case would be, when regulations came into force decades ago, and had no formal training, but had been doing it for a number of years, and they trusted them. And as we all know, human nature is human nature. You can trust almost everyone, but there are those you can't trust. And that's what happened in Walkerton. So.
Right. And so out of the sort of inquisition, or not inquisition, but the inquiry, the Walkerton Clean Water Center came to be? Is that sort of how
it did? Yeah.
Okay.
Now retired, Justice Dennis O'Connor, who's still very active, by the way, was commissioned to do an inquiry. The book I don't have in front of me, but his inquiry report was 2 phases, each about 275 pages, and he literally made hundreds of recommendations to the Ontario government on, if I can pardon the pun, cleaning up drinking water regulations in the province. And one of them was the creation of a centralized center for the training of drinking water operators in the province, all of whom would require certification by the government of Ontario with standardized tests before they were allowed to work in a drinking water plant.
So prior to 2000, that wasn't the case?
No, it was not. It was quite literally all over the map. Wow. And if you'd been around for a dog's age and you were in the industry and you'd been testing chlorine for 25 years, you continued to test chlorine. Nobody ever even checked your math skills. let
Right.
alone anything else.
Right.
And that's all changed. We offer, we could talk about that later, but we offer about 58 different courses now, including elementary math that the drinking water operators have to take so that
Wow.
they can actually do water calculations. So,
Right. So you're sort of, you know exactly where I'm going. So tell me about the Walkerton Clean Water Center. What is the Walkerton Clean Water Center all about?
well, we're in about 23,000 square feet here, have
Okay.
been since 2009. This building that we're in was purpose built for us, built 10 years ago. We rented for about 7 years after the O'Connor inquiry here in Walkerton, and then had this building constructed. So we do three things. We train drinking water operators all over the province. We have a large building here, but only about 15% of our courses are actually taught here. About 85% are on the road from Timmins to Belleville to Grand Bend to Ottawa and places beyond, way up north. We're also in First Nations, which I'll touch on. But we have three things we really do here. One is the training, and we train about 9,500 drinking water operators annually
Wow.
from this center. About 1,000 of which are literally trained here. But to train everybody, we need a 100,000 square foot facility, and it makes no sense because we want to train in the communities in which people operate. So we
Right.
go there. So we
Right.
have a small fleet of vehicles,
Mhm.
custom made equipment that our scientists and our technicians here make to take the training on the road. And we train about 58 different courses, including what's the province calls, and we have happening this week in our center, the entry level course to become an operator in training, an OIT. And so we
Right.
have 12 people under COVID rules right now, 2 walls away from me, who are here all week doing the entry level course. Then
Okay.
outside of training, though, we have a very strong research and development focus. So we have PhDs here and master's degree scientists and technicians who are always keeping up to date on drinking water technologies around the world and helping the government and helping the water owners and operators in the province and managers determine what their problems may be or problems that are coming down the road. And without going into great length, one of the best examples of that right now is microcystins, cyanotoxins, aka green algae, which 5 years ago was a problem in Lake Erie, and nobody
Right.
else worried about it. Today, we have green algae in James Bay, at the tip
Wow.
of Hudson Bay, which didn't even
Wow.
have water in it until 20 years ago because it was covered with ice.
Hmm.
And so it
That's
has broad
amazing.
implications for the province, and we do a lot of work in that area. We also test drinking water systems around the province, not as a lab. We are not a lab in competition with the private sector, but when municipal owners or First Nations come to us and say, we're doing the best we can, we have a problem, we're either not meeting provincial standards or we're barely meeting them, we actually take portable testing equipment all over the province and dump it in place in situ, as it were, for sometimes months on end with remote monitoring, and then determine what their problems are and help them solve the problems.
Oh, that's fantastic. And yeah, I can understand too that being able to remotely go and train operators, you're also able to uncover a multitude of issues because I suppose there's all kinds of issues that could occur with water quality, right?
Yeah, and while we're there, that's what we do. We don't do it on purpose, but generally, if we're off training somewhere, we will get the operator from location X who says, you know what, our iron and manganese and our arsenic are right at provincial regulatory maxes, and we're doing the best we can. We think we're doing the right, chloramination. We think we're doing the right additives. We think we're putting the right amount of chlorine in, but the water's changing, and source water changes all the time. And so we go out and help them work with the problem. Again, we're not engineers. We don't compete with the consulting engineering sector either. But for the smaller municipalities that can't afford to write a check for $50,000 to an engineering company, we'll go in for a few thousand, cost recovery only, determine what the problem is, and then work with them, leading them to a firm that can then help them add whatever equipment they need to add or change whatever processes they need to process.
That's amazing. And I can't I can't imagine that something like this didn't exist. Well, I suppose it just took a tragedy for something like this to be developed and introduced to Canada. But what a fantastic.
It did, and we have one like organization which really isn't a Walkerton Clean Water Center, but there are things similar in Quebec, but
Okay.
there is nothing like this in the rest of Canada. And I can't tell you how many inquiries we turn away from the other 9 provinces and territories in this country every week asking
Wow.
us for help. And
Right.
we can't provide it. We're funded by the Ontario taxpayer. We're an agency,
Right.
but we're an agency on a break-even basis. And so we are not allowed and do not want to waste our finite resources on helping others we'd like to help, but we can't help because they're not in Ontario.
Right. It seems to me like this is something that could be put into just about every province.
Easily, readily.
Hmm.
We added First Nations 2.5 years ago, and we are working with both the Ontario government and the federal governments with Ontario First Nations, but that's probably a really good example. The First Nations in Ontario in remote areas are like Sandy Lake and others, and Red Rock are certainly not the only ones that have drinking water issues in this country. It's across the country. But can we help other First Nations in Canada? Not under our current mandate and our current guidelines. It's impossible for us to do it, even if we'd like to. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing, because it's the work that you do is so helpful to First Nations and all kinds of small rural Canadian municipalities, like you said, that can't afford a big engineering consulting firm.
Exactly.
Yeah, very interesting. And so after the Walkerton tragedy and the development of the Walkerton Clean Water Center, are there drinking water systems that are still at risk aside from First Nation communities?
We've made tremendous inroads, but I think you said it correctly a second ago, Justin, when you started talking about small systems.
Right.
The smaller the system gets,
Mm-hmm.
the more at risk. I don't want to use the word danger, but the more at risk it can be. So if you specifically look at individual well owners and users across this province and across Canada, even in Ontario, they fall under regulations, but it is self-enforcement, if I can put it that way.
Right.
The farmer that's on a well, or the church in rural Ontario that's on a well, has to take its water samples to the public health unit
Right.
to be tested to meet regulations.
Right.
Well, okay, they've got other things to do. Is the minister in a small rural Ontario church going to be checking the water every day and taking in water samples? He's got his parishioners to work with, and so the smaller the system, the more at risk they are. And
Right.
we get down to the very small level. Give you an example. We're now working, which 5 years ago we would not have been. We didn't have the resources. We're now working with with all of the RV park and campsite owners in the province of Ontario, and we're providing them with training, because up until 2 or 3 years ago, even there wasn't a lot of formalized training for the really small operators, and there are still living beings living on those farms and in those churches and in those RV parks, and it's important that we keep them safe. But the smaller a system you go to, the harder it is to regulate. How many drinking water inspectors are there in the province? Probably quite a few, but they're pretty busy with Toronto and Sudbury and Timmins and London and even smaller places like Walkerton and Hanover and Guelph. But try to get an inspector to go out and look at individual homeowners' wells around the province and make sure that they're meeting regulations is an impossible task.
And I don't know a ton about Ontario, but I know I spent some time in southeastern British Columbia, and there were small communities there that would have sort of a community water system that was, it was essentially a well, or in some cases pulled right out of like a water source off the mountain.
Out of some source water that we don't want to talk about sometimes. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and just untreated water even, but something like this would be so helpful for them.
Exactly. And as our environment changes, because this is a clean water series, we can do everything as your company and as many firms and governments do with the resources at our disposal. But the water in this world is changing. The
Right.
source water is changing.
Right.
The streams are changing. When I came into this position 3 years ago, the board of directors here, and it's a board, I don't work directly for the government. I have a board of directors of experts that I report to. One of the questions they asked me in the final interview was, if you could sum up what you need to do as the new CEO of the Walkerton Clean Water Center, what would you say? And I said, two things. One, First Nations, and two, a cliche that I like to coin. Everybody's drinking water is somebody else's wastewater.
Mm.
And
Yes.
that's the truth, whether it's direct or indirect. And so with changing water conditions and environmental conditions, we need to be vigilant to try and keep up and keep on top of the technologies to solve the problems. And again, the smaller the system, like you said, Southeast BC, Osoyoos might be too big an example, but let's take Grand Forks, British Columbia,
Sure.
probably small enough that it's almost a community water system, or it's certainly a very small system. And when they run into trouble, who do they go to?
Yeah.
It's not Ghostbusters, and they don't have a Walkerton Clean Water Center there. So
yeah, no, that's true. And it's interesting. So now that the province of Ontario has had rigid drinking water standards in place for some 17 years, when will it be looking at wastewater regulations, which have not changed since then and which are inextricably linked to drinking water?
Yeah, as I said, everyone's drinking water is someone else's wastewater. I know the government is looking at it. We've been in discussions with them from the training and research and technology standpoint. I can say that the Walkerton Clean Water Center is ready to go tomorrow. Facility aside, because we're pretty cramped here right now. But when the government makes the decision to revisit wastewater regulations, as they did with drinking water 17 years ago, I guess you have to give it a couple of years after the Walkerton crisis, when they revisited and revamped drinking water regulations, once they do that for wastewater, which I think they probably will need to do soon, we'll be ready to do our part. I mean, the best example is, I guess, is going back 6 months now, but nobody died, but when a faulty gate valve can dump 15 billion liters of wastewater, raw wastewater, sewage, into Chadoke Creek in Hamilton, a city of 650,000 people, you've got a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're talking about protecting that source water, because I like your adage there that everyone's drinking water is someone else's wastewater. It's so true. So assuming that the government goes ahead and starts to change the regulations around wastewater, do you think that there would be some type of Walkerton Clean Water Center that's also assisting with wastewater treatment?
They would have to, with training, certainly. The advantage that, and we've been discussing this with Ministry of the Environment, Conservation, Parks, is that because of our emphasis on broadly training across the province and a mandate to focus on smaller systems, we estimate that over 50% of the drinking water operators we train every year are also wastewater operators.
Right.
So for us, when the green flag goes down, we're ready to go. We just have to take a 2-day course in Sudbury and that we're currently offering, and say, okay, the course is now 2 days on drinking water and 1 day on wastewater. All of our staff trainers and contract trainers are fully accredited for both drinking water and wastewater. And so at a really cost-effective rate for both us in terms of increased marginal costs and the students who do have to pay for these courses, it costs their bosses and their municipalities much less money if they can go to a course for 2 days and stay at the same hotel overnight if they have to, or show up the next day and do their wastewater at the same time and get accredited for that. So we're looking forward to it, and we're hoping the government makes a decision on that soon.
That sounds fantastic. So how does the Walkerton Clean Water Center remain current on industry trends, new technologies that are available in water treatment?
Well, as I said, I have not that necessarily means that's what's current, but I do have some PhDs and master's degree people here, and they're very talented. And we operate on a committee basis also. So we have both a research advisory committee
Okay.
of the top academic, private sector, and government people in the province that meets regularly for the center. And I think we have 12 on it right now. It was 16 at one point. And we also have a training advisory committee. Again, experts not just in training, but experts in drinking water systems. So we rely on those two committees to provide us with what we may not be able to pick up. But our staff here work regularly with all of the universities across Canada and, of course, worldwide. We don't have any specific collaboration going right now with international universities or universities worldwide, but we are always working with Canadian universities and finding the latest achievements and the latest research and technologies that are going on, particularly, of course, Europe and the USA, which are the two primary ones we look at. So,
right, excellent. And you have a lab there that I'm sure, different manufacturers and distributors are able to assist with.
We have a full lab to do all the analysis we need to do. And an interesting question. Just last week, it was supposed to be commissioned 4.5 months ago. We had custom designed and built a total organic carbon analyzer, a TOC, as they're called. Okay. And it just had the products delivered, the raw products in boxes, delivered when COVID-19 hit. So the US manufacturer and Canadian manufacturer could not come and put it together and train because of the health regulations. So we just had it commissioned 2 weeks ago. But it's a $75,000 custom-made device for analyzing one of the newest problems that both the federal government and the provincial governments across Canada are now ramping up their research into, which is total organic carbon, which is creating all kinds of new issues. So,
Interesting. And I know we sort of mentioned this when we first started talking. Proline is excited to donate actually our ProFlare system, which is a fluoropolymer piping that basically doesn't leak with sodium hypochlorite, which is a common disinfectant used, obviously, as well.
And fairly costly.
Yes, indeed. And it can attack solvent welded PVC connections. So with our ProFlare system, it eliminates all of that. Eliminates the leaks. Another product we have, which is it's a thread sealant called Lox 8, which also doesn't leak with chemical attack from hypochlorite, ferric chloride, alum. And so we're really excited to get this into your hands and into your lab there for you guys to test and use.
And we work with companies all the time, and I wasn't here at the time, but I've been told that we have a 10,000 square foot technology demonstration facility where we have every drinking water operating system in Ontario is in that facility, shrunken down with magic dust, because because we've all 7 or 8 there on a micro scale, and they're all fully functional, and that's how we do our hands-on training. But I'm told that of all of the equipment in there, it was the private sector in this province and in Canada that donated about 70% of the equipment that went in there 10 years ago, because of course the government couldn't afford it. And the company said, look, we're in business to keep water clean too. We just make money doing it. That's what we're supposed to do as private companies. And so we have no problem. If we end up in wastewater, for example, and build another 20,000 square foot facility here, because we have land right behind me that we're attempting to purchase. Last piece of land adjoining our center.
Okay.
I would go first and foremost to every single company that we could get our hands on in the wastewater business and say, would you like to do it?
Yeah.
There's no obligation to do it. We'll find the money to put in the right stuff eventually, but the private sector has a vested interest in making sure that both drinking and wastewater are clean too, and everything in between, like your Proline's fittings. If it's minus 45 in Saskatoon, where I lived for a couple of years running the province's infrastructure center of excellence before I came here, and something breaks, it's not fun.
Yeah. No.
And it doesn't just have to be a water main that's 75 years old and was accidentally buried 2 feet below ground instead of the provincially coded 4.5 feet. In minus 45, anything goes, and it can be ABS, it could be PVC, it could be solid concrete, and the way to prevent that is all you guys in the private sector doing what you do to stay up on your trends and research worldwide to make the best stuff that the owners and municipalities and operators around the world can use. And so we consider the private sector partners of ours, even though we're a government agency, and we love working with you. So
yeah, well, that's well said, and we're excited to be a partner with the Walkerton Clean Water Center.
And I'll tell my research and technology manager, Dr. Suleiman Diong, to wait for the trucks to show up with all the new sealants. So.
That sounds great.
Actually, and between you and me, Justin, I don't know how long it's been or if you've ever been here, but now that we've been operating fully now, month and a half, staff back in the office, training according to Grey Bruce health guidelines. As I said, we've got training going on right now. But for you personally and Proline, next time you're up in the area, or if you want to come up and you're not in the area and you want to visit, contact me and we'll run you through an entire tour of the whole facility as it stands today and everything we do. So.
Oh, wow. That's 100%. I will take you up on that. And I'll have a trunk full of goodies when I come as well.
just bring Starbucks. We don't have one in Walkerton.
Not a problem. I'm guessing there isn't a Starbucks in Walkerton.
No, or Hanover. No. Well, no, there isn't even one in Hanover, I don't think. No, this is small town Ontario. But frankly, I wouldn't live any other place.
Oh, wonderful.
My staff here are great. They're local. I'm not. I came here from Saskatchewan, where I was for 4 years. But we were in Milton, my wife and I, before that, in the transportation sector. And being back here in small town Ontario, I wouldn't do it any other way.
Yeah.
My drive to work is a minute and a half, and in rush hour it's 2 minutes to get home. So.
And a traffic jam would consist of wildlife crossing the road, I'm guessing.
No, but if there's 5 cars on the street instead of 3, that's a jam.
That sounds quite nice, actually.
And I won't even talk about housing costs.
Nice. I like the plug for Walkerton. So before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask you one more question.
Sure, Justin.
For those looking to make a career in municipal operations, what advice would you give to them?
That's a really good question that doesn't come up often enough. We bring 600 high school and junior high school students through here every year in April, May. This year we could not do it because of COVID, but I had 175 grade 11 students in our training room last year. And one of them actually put up their hand and said, "Why would I want to be a drinking water operator?" And I said, and I think his name was Alexander. I said, "Alexander, because all of you have a lot greater concern for the environment than anyone in my generation ever did. That's A. But how about if I give you B?" And he said, "Okay, what's B?" And I said, "Even in small town Ontario, if you want to become a drinking water operator, you need to go through the 1-week exam, have grade 12 or its equivalent, with 1 week training, become an operator in training, spend a year as an operator in training in a really interesting field where you're helping your community, and your starting salary anywhere around here will be $65,000 a year. Can you make that at Tim Hortons? And I had 100 kids in that room go, $65,000 a year? They can't even conceive of money like that. And I said, absolutely. And yes, you'll have to do some shift work for a while. But if you become a manager in a municipal system, you're over 100. And I think about 45 kids in that room changed their minds on what they want to be when they grow up.
No doubt.
And so it's rewarding. It's helpful. You're helping the world. You're helping your own community when you can see the water coming out of your tap that you made pure. But it's really good money and it's amazing benefits. You work for a city or you work for a province in a provincial government, in a municipal government, it's OMERS, the Ontario Municipal Employment, Retirement and Pension System. In the government, it's the Ontario Pension Board. And as long as you're willing to make a commitment to it and make a career out of it, you can do really well and actually enjoy what you do for a living for the rest of your life.
Again, very well said.
So yeah. I'm thinking of switching professions.
Not to mention, we talk about, nurses and hospital medical workers being on the front lines of COVID. I would say water operators you could put them in that same category right from the beginning of this pandemic.
We know water operators all over this province. The province issued an emergency order in May. It took till May to get it out because they had to get the regulation done, permitting people who were not certified operators but are retired certified operators to come into plants and help, because drinking water operators all over this province, system works 24 hours. They had bunks moved into the drinking water operation and wastewater operation plants all over this province. And many of them did not see their families for 3 months at a time.
Wow.
Because they could not leave the building. Because if you took down 25% of your drinking water operators in a large city, you're in trouble. But if you took down 25% of your drinking water operators, of which you only have 4 in a small community, your drinking water plant shuts down. So to prevent infection, they all stayed inside 4 walls for 2, 3, and 4 months.
Amazing. Yeah, and those stories.
And that is the front line. No different than a hospital or anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been terrific. Thank you so much, Carl, for being a part of this show today.
Justin, our pleasure.
It's been great, and I look forward to seeing you in person in the coming weeks.
I hope so, and as soon as you can get up here.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much, Carl.
All right, have a great one.
You too.
Bye-bye.